And out at the cemetery, I'm now 16, and when they lowered the coffin into the grave, I burst into tears, and I was so ashamed because I'd been told by my dad that grown men don't cry. As I recall my young days in the bush on this giant sheep station, there was an awful lot of alcohol consumed, and both my parents became alcoholics. I always knew them as alcoholics, and so I wasn't close to them at all, but I developed a really great admiration and respect for my dad, who was an achiever, who got things done, and he built in me a great deal of self-belief that if you set your goal and were determined and earnest, you could get there. In a hospital in Sydney following an operation, and my grandmother came to get me and take me back to the family property or the town where my dad was, very ill. I didn't know that he'd been ill, and we jumped on a plane and went up there and got there too late. He'd died in the meantime. And out at the cemetery, I'm now 16, and when they lowered the coffin into the grave, I burst into tears, and I was so ashamed because I'd been told by my dad that grown men don't cry. But seeing that coffin go below the surface was too much. And almost there and then, I set as my motto, my aim, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. I wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps. My dad died on his 44th birthday, and so had no life insurance, no provision, no planning for his death, and so the whole property was assessed with this enormous amount of money, and the only way to pay the death duties was to break the property up into smaller parcels and sell it. And then the question is, what am I going to do? And one uncle had suggested I become a stock and station agent and auctioneer. I had some experience at it. And so I joined a big city firm, and then I got recruited to move to Tottenham, which wasn't so far from the family property. And I lived in the hotel in Tottenham. And I came down one morning when I was 19 years old, and there's a pretty young 19-year-old girl. Who on earth could this be in this little country town? And I later found out that she was the new school teacher. After dinner, she came upstairs to the lounge where I'd just sat at the piano and entertained myself as I did most nights. Played some music, and I remember what I was playing. I was playing Ramona when she came up, beautiful old-time waltz, and she came up and chatted to me, sort of connected, and we romanced, and a year and a half later, we were married. Before long, Ray started to encourage me to study. I did well, in fact, have the highest grade since 1929, and I was offered a role in a major property consulting firm, spent a year in Sydney with them, then moved to Melbourne for a year, opened an office in Adelaide, and then they made me senior partner and moved me back to Sydney. And before long, I was approached by a man who was in the planning stages of building a new city in Cairo, Egypt. And he asked me if I would go and look at his project and give him some advice about it. came back and said, I thought it was absolutely terrific, but here are 5 things that I would contemplate changing. And he said, Tony, that is absolutely terrific. Thank you very much. I'd love you to go and run it. And I couldn't believe it. I didn't know anything about Cairo or Egypt or whatever, but we learned Arabic and we packed up our family and went and hired 1,000 people and proceeded to build this city. And I'm 35 years old. So we did that for a while, and blow me down if the project then got nationalised. Tried to settle the compensation that the government had promised to give us. They mucked around rather than refused, and so we sued them, and I pursued that for 13 3/4 years. We moved from Toronto to Tulsa to Houston to Atlanta, and it's in Atlanta that our lives took a dramatic turn. One of the people with whom I was doing business was a leader in the church led by Michael Youssef. And he said to me one day, I'd love you to meet this man who's our pastor, who was born and raised in Egypt and educated in Australia. And so we were very keen to meet him, and had a lunch at a fancy club in Atlanta, and stepped outside and chatted in Arabic, and I came to the conclusion that my Arabic was slightly better than his. A few days after that, Ray and I had a terrible argument. I had become so thoughtless with her and the rest of the family because I was under tremendous pressure doing enormous travelling. And Ray said, I'm going back to Australia. I don't want to put up with this anymore. And I thought that was just a joke. It was just talk. So I went off to Florida to play in a tennis tournament and came back, and she'd gone. I remember lying on the floor of the entrance room to our house crying with our 2 sons alongside me. As it turned out, the minister of this church then came to visit us because we'd only been there a week or so before. And he said, what's gone wrong? And I told him and explained to him, and he said, you need Jesus. And I said, no, I need help. Help me. And he said, Jesus will provide the help you need. And will you pray with me? And nobody had ever in my whole life had made such a suggestion. And the most amazing thing, within minutes, I acknowledged in my own heart that I was the cause of all the problem. I'd have never done that before. I was too vain, too driven, too committed. It was absolutely traumatic. So I took some counselling and eventually got Ray's agreement to allow me to go to Australia and meet up again with her. And that set us on a new course, and it resulted in us thinking about significance rather than success. Not long after I arrived in Australia, I was approached by somebody acting as chairman of Habitat for Humanity in Australia, and he asked me if I would take over as chairman. Habitat provide houses for the working poor, hundreds of thousands of houses around the world. And we were just gearing up in Australia, had to restructure the whole organisation, and blow me down if we didn't run into the tsunami in Asia, and we realised what a huge role we had to play there. And in the end, Habitat, we built 25,000 new houses following the tsunami, a huge effort. In parallel, we got invited to go to East Timor which had just been vacated by the Indonesians, who destroyed as much of the country as they could as they withdrew. And I started an organisation there. We built lots of houses. I raised quite a lot of money. And the then leader of East Timor was visiting Australia. I took a couple of our donors to meet him. He made a speech and I went up to him afterwards and I told him what we were doing and he burst into tears. It was the most touching thing. People who come from dysfunctional families, such as I believe I did, often become leaders. They're trying to find a way to get out of this pickle. This shy young boy from the bush, whose parents didn't disown him but didn't nurture him perhaps, has grown up with me and we together found Jesus and made him the Lord of our life. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark. And may there be no sadness or farewell when I embark. Out outborne of time and place, the flood may bear me far. I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. This is a beautiful piece of poetry which I adore, but the thing with which I disagree is Alfred Lord Tennyson said, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar, but I know I'll see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar.